Well, I just have you guys up here, so I think I'll just go right to the message. Is that okay? You think you guys can? Yeah, he's kind of sad, but he's going to go. We had a great time yesterday, the men's breakfast. Great bunch. Great bunch. We had 5 tables full of guys, I think. And I read a story that it's kind of schmaltzy, and they told me I've been watching too much of the Lifetime channel. And it was great. And so it was fun to share that with those guys. They act so tough. They're not that tough, I just want to say. So it's starting to seem like Christmas, isn't it? A little snow out there, just like a little, covering of the package. And we are taking this Christmas journey through the 4 titles that Isaiah gave the coming Messiah. So last week we explored Wonderful Counselor. And we talked about Jesus as a counselor in the legal sense, in that he advises us and he stands by us in life's trials and he speaks for us. He's also a counselor in that way that the Old Testament talks about counselors around a king. And so he guides us in wise decision making if we will allow him. And finally, he is a counselor in the sense of being a therapist, if you will, who connects with us and leads us to ask that question, what is it we truly want? And he guides us into new directions and new places. And our challenge last week was to get clear with God and ourselves that what we truly want in our life is his counsel, his presence, and his guidance. Well, now we move on from Wonderful Counselor to that second title, Mighty God. Our text this morning drops us directly into the Christmas story. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. May we pray. God, it's a story we know so well. We hear Linus saying it. And yet, God, it is ever new and ever true. Let His truth speak to each of us today. In Jesus' name, amen. It's no accident that this story begins with the name Caesar Augustus. Augustus was actually one of his titles. It meant the illustrious one. He was also known, as we think of them, as an emperor, but actually they called him an imperator, which was the word from which we get emperor. And that word actually means commander-in-chief. Makes you think a little bit, doesn't it? Caesar Augustus wielded the greatest personal power on earth. In addition, his empire represented the most devastating state force on earth. This adopted son of his uncle Julius had identified every single person who had been involved in killing his uncle and made sure every one of them was killed. And then he wiped out oppositional armies going against him, took them on army by army. And as a ruler, he was hailed as one who was so amazingly good that the Senate was happy to turn over the running of the government to him. His image was stamped on all the coins of the realm. They even named a month after him. There was no person or force as mighty as Caesar Augustus in all the world. And now the empire, every bit as dominant and scary as the one you'll see when you go to the movie theaters and watch Star Wars, this empire issued a decree. All the world should be enrolled. Rome was organizing the populace of their many colonies so that it could know how to track them down when it came time to collect taxes. They hadn't invented Social Security numbers at that time. Thus, thousands and thousands of people were required to travel to their ancestral home. Maybe that they've never even been to that town, but travel they must. It must have been a terrible interruption to their work and their income, but Rome didn't care about such things. And among those thousands traveling that route from the north to the south are Mary and Joseph. Years later, perhaps Jesus would recall his mother's story about that terrible trip. Maybe that was one reason it struck his heart as he looked at the masses. The Bible says that Jesus, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. So far in the Gospel of Luke, we're now in chapter 2. In chapter 1, we were introduced to Mary. We don't really hear much about Joe except that she was betrothed to him. But Mary, we get a picture of her. She is faithful. She is ready to do whatever the Lord wants her to do. In the face of the criticism that would naturally come with a pregnancy, in the face of the shame that she might feel, our Mary is triumphant. In fact, she sings a song. But her song, it is not Julie Andrews saying the hills are alive with the sound of music. It's not some feel-good tune to tap your toes. Mary sings a song of fire. She says, this baby means that God is on the move. He is about to show his power. Things are about to change. Here are some of her lyrics. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things and has sent the rich away empty. It's like Karl Marx got pregnant. Things are going to be different, she says. There's going to be some justice around here. And it's not all going to be nicey-nicey. The hungry are going to be filled while the rich are sent away empty. She is talking like she is on the barricade, and now is the time to rise up. And then boom, chapter 2. Caesar Augustus issues a decree. All of a sudden we wake up from our dream of a new world and things being set right. We go from the joyful night to that harsh light of morning. It's back to business as usual, where forces beyond us control so much of our lives. Joseph, it says, goes up to register. That is, Joseph takes his young lady, pregnant in her 9th month, and travels to Bethlehem. Maybe some of the days she travels on the back of a burro. At other times she is walking. Perhaps someone else on the road had a wooden cart drawn by a horse, and they saw her condition and gave her a ride for a while until it was just too bumpy and painful for her to take. I looked it up. It turns out if you go from where they started to Bethlehem, it's a 97-mile journey. Maybe it took more than a week given her condition. They must have worried she would have had that baby on one of those days or one of those nights along the road. She probably had contractions along the way. No doubt on one of those nights, before she finally found a way to fall asleep with her great belly and no bed, she must have thought, is this the plan, God? Because it doesn't feel like you are mighty. It doesn't seem as if the world is changing one little bit. And then, of course, they get into town. You talk about forces around us that shape our lives, like Caesar Augustus, but there are other forces that are just as mighty, even if they are less nefarious. There are forces like luck and scarce resources. After a journey like that, I'm sure all she wanted was a chance to lay her head down, her and Joseph both. All she wanted was a room. But there was no room at the Best Eastern. The Harrod Hilton was all booked up. The Hyatt was not available. There must have been hundreds of people in the same spot looking for anywhere to lay their heads. As Joseph came back from one more doorway, shaking his head, Mary must have thought, "Where are you, Lord?" We've developed this story, the story of the innkeeper. We don't see the actual guy in our text, but somebody, somewhere, must have taken pity on them. We know he didn't have a room. But then again, he just couldn't shut the door. He saw the desperation on their faces. He saw how this slip of a girl was now so great with child, and he just couldn't shut them out. So, what to do? Well, you can bed down with the animals. And that day, the animals were sometimes in the basement or the bottom floor of a house. And they said that they would build the living quarters over it. And they said that's because the warmth of the animals rose up through the house. Unfortunately, I'm sure other things rose up as well. So more often, they would have the animals in like a little cave area, maybe have some canvas over the top to keep some of the warmth in. And so I guess in that hotel that'd be C1, that is the cave. Would you rather be out on the road with these other people or sleep in the cave? They're both pretty crummy options, aren't they? They opted for C1. Among the animals, they found a place to lie down. And as the first birth pangs hit, she must have thought, in this cave, away from our families, where are you, Lord? Where is this mighty God who is going to change the world? Where is this promise of a new order where the humble are lifted up and those proud who made this decree and those who profit off it laugh at us as we pass them by? Where are you when we are subject to such an emperor and you seem nowhere near the throne? Where is the mighty God? Who would blame her if she did have those thoughts? Heck, you've had them yourself. If God is so big and powerful, why do such schmucks hold office in our political system? Why are those who are vulnerable not protected? Why is it that the rich get tax breaks to pass along their millions to trust babies while the poor get a tax increase? Why do health nuts get cancer while the town drunk seems to go on forever? There is a lot wrong with this world, and if we had a few days to be in charge, we would shake this whole thing up, wouldn't we? Where is the mighty God when you need Him? And yet, take another look at this picture. Like those holographic kind of 3D images. From one side you see a distant emperor calling the shots. He is all powerful. He will even be designated a god by his country when he dies. But from another angle, there is something else going on. This child, who was foretold from the foundation of time, who was prophesied some 800 years before he was born through Isaiah. This child is coming into this world. And that's where the joy comes in. You might look at the troubles Mary and Joseph faced not as proof of the empire's power, but rather as that empire's attempt to throw everything and the kitchen sink at this coming Savior, to nail shut the door of eternity and tell him to stay away. But the child still comes. Nothing can stop him. Not decrees, not hard journeys, not deprivations, not animals, not straw. Nothing will stop the mighty God from fulfilling what He plans to accomplish in this world. Because the truth is that there is a world beyond and behind this world. There is a God in heaven who has a story of love, and He wants to share it. He has tried to share it in various forms and ways, but now He has come into our world as a link to the world beyond. You know, now we're in the computer age, and a lot of words have changed their meaning. For example, it used to be only in church you'd hear about, I'm going to read from the text. But now when I say text, you think about your phones, don't you? Well, another word that has changed is the word link, We know what a link is, but now you can put a link in an email. And by the way, if I've already lost you, I apologize, but that's how it is. And the thing about a link is, if you click it, it takes you to another place entirely. It will open up a whole new document. And I think it might be helpful for us to think about Jesus as that kind of link, because that's what he is. He is our link to this other world, this world that is behind ours. Behind the obvious circumstances and coincidences is a world of God's presence and God's power. Christmas is one of those times when the distance between this world and the next grows thin, and we can almost hear the angels sing and see the star in the sky. We keep making that link from that world to this and this world to that. And so instead of it being a dive into materialism, Christmas is a link into the spiritual, into the wonderful truth that our mighty God is with us. That's why we speak God into this world, why we allow His Spirit to guide us into activities like loving others, whether or not they deserve it, like reminding them of the joy that is Christmas, because Jesus is the reason for the season. And while Mary is lying on that thin straw, covering up a dirt floor, as she is wondering where this mighty God is, the other truth is this: this God is literally inside her. The one who was named by Isaiah, Mighty God, is about to be born on Christmas Day. And my point is this: in that very moment, when you wonder, where is this mighty God in your life? When you have that diagnosis, when you have the terrible news from your kids, in the disappointments, or when in the times when life just seems like a gray fog and you could care less, right in that moment, the mighty God is with you. He is in you. And that means that we have access to His power in our lives at all times. And that ought to give you a little squeak of joy. While it might look to all the world that we are on our last legs, that we are victim and failure and lost, still, we have the ability to turn to Him and allow His power to work in us. What we see all around us is not the whole story. Years later, the Apostle Paul would write these words: "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." Those words came years after Mary's long, long Christmas Eve. They came after the child was born. They came after he grew up, after he had his schooling and started his career as carpenter. They came after his career changed to be a traveling speaker, a miracle worker, a leader of the people, the Messiah. They came after that harrowing day when he was nailed to the tree and he died. They came after death's back was broken and he rose from the dead. They came after the word began to spread that he was God Himself come to us. In fact, those words that I read were from a letter to the church in Rome. They came back from the world from where the decree was issued a generation before. They were written to new believers, including the very Praetorian Guard who would guard Caesar Augustus' son, who is now on the throne, and on their other shift, they would go and learn from the Apostle Paul, the apostle in chains. To those people, the apostle was writing that what you see is not the entire thing. There is always another angle. There is another way to see what this world is dishing to you. And to do so, you and I submit ourselves to God and allow Him to renew our minds, to change our perspective, to see once again where the true might is. Then, as we look at it, the headlines start to change. It's not this authority. It's not that movement that is in charge. Behind and above it all, it is the silent hand of our mighty God, even working in our weakness, working through our willingness, renewing our minds and spirits to become the very persons He is shaping us to be now and on into eternity. And we, each of us, we are to extend a hand to bring others along on that same journey. Some of our journeys are 100 miles, some are 100 years. All of them are the journey from this world to the other world, the world that is beyond Caesar's decrees. It's a world, in fact, even beyond taxes. It's the world where the Lamb is on the throne, where a crowd too big to number bows before him. It is a world full of joy. And until then, we bear witness in this world that the other world is also there, just beyond, and that Jesus is our link. For he is a mighty God, no matter what this world throws at us. Amen? We'll take up our offering now. This ushers please come forward.